As Burn is coming up, just want to welcome those folks who will be watching this YouTube video in the weeks or months ahead. It is Mother's Day on 2025, May the 11th, here at Grace United Church in Coombs, British Columbia. And we're glad that you're able to get encouragement through the scripture reading and through the message today. Burn, please.
Reading today is from Isaiah chapter 40, verses 1 to 12. Comfort for God's people. Comfort my people, says the Lord. Speak tenderly to Jerusalem and proclaim to her that her hard service has been completed, that her sins have been paid for, that she has received from the Lord's hand double for all her sins. A voice of one calling, in the desert, prepare the way for the Lord. Make straight in the wilderness a highway for our God. Every valley shall be raised up, every mountain and hill made low. The rough ground shall be level, the rugged places a plain, and the glory of the Lord will be revealed. And all mankind together will see, for the mouth of the Lord has spoken. A voice cries out, and I said, what shall I cry? All men are like grass, and all their glory is like the flowers of the field. The grass withers, and the flowers fall, because the breath of the Lord blows on them. Surely the people are grass. The grass withers, and the flowers fall, but the word of our God stands forever. You who bring good tidings to Zion, go up on a high mountain. You who bring good tidings to Jerusalem, lift up your voice with a shout. Lift it up. Do not be afraid. Say to the towns of Judah, here is your God. See, the sovereign Lord comes with power, and his arm rules for him. See, his reward is with him, and his recompense accompanies him. He tends his flock like a shepherd. He gathers the lambs in his arm, and he carries them close to his heart. He gently leads those that have young. Who has measured the waters in the hollows in his hand, or with the breadth of his hand marked off the heavens? Who has held the dust of the earth in a basket, or weighed the mountains on the scales and the hills in a balance? The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God. Thank you, Bern. I'm in a series called Finding Hope and Peace in Turbulent Times, and I'm looking around for stories of hope. I'm looking around for places where hope is alive and where things are changing in a positive direction, because there are so many stories in the news and things that are not really all that good going on in the world around us. And you know that at a personal level, perhaps because of the challenges you may be facing, or because of the situations that cause you some anxiety for your kids or grandkids or nieces or nephews, or for future generations, or just because we're living in these kind of uncertain times. So I'm always looking for places where hope is alive and where I see God's evidence showing me that God hasn't forgotten us. God isn't absent from the world. In actual fact, God is much more present when you start looking for places where hope resides. And this past Friday night, I was at the Craig Bay Choristers concert at Knox United Church. And you know what? I just came away from that concert feeling just so wonderful, because the music uplifted my soul. There was fun, there was laughter. People were joining together, bringing their voices together in harmony to just bring their music to our souls. And you know how good music can really just change something inside of here. All of us have music that we love that changes us or that gives us hope or encouragement when we're going through tough times. So music, thanks Barry and of course Al and Joy were also in that chorus. And it was just a wonderful, uplifting time. And I hope each one of you also is finding that there are places of hope that you look to or you're seeing in these difficult times. Today I'm going to draw on some images and words from one of the major prophets found in the Hebrew Scriptures. Now, most of us haven't spent a lot of time reading the prophetic books of the Bible. Most of us think that those prophets were kind of grizzled old guys who were just fed up with the world, and they came into towns and cities with fire and brimstone and, calling down the name of the Lord on those heathen people or the people who've gone away from God. And yes, there is some of that in there. There's no doubt about it. But the prophets were also called by God to bring messages of hope to people in times of darkness, times of discomfort and disorientation. The prophets were often chosen by God in a time of a national crisis to speak directly to the people or their leaders about what God was seeing, which typically, of course, wasn't a popular position to take. Many of the prophets felt no compunction to hold back on criticizing the kings or the leaders of the religious kind of communities that they were responsible for. At least the prophets felt that they had the hand of God upon them to speak God's words of kind of discontent. And of course, when they spoke those words, oftentimes they got into trouble, right? They had to. Just imagine a person like Bernie Sanders or Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez standing outside the White House gates day in, day out with placards and signs and calling down the government for, the things that they see going on. They wouldn't get a very good reception from, the President Trump or some of his followers. If you were doing that, you wouldn't. And this was quite similar to the prophets, who were often seen as being a thorn in the side of the flesh of the leaders of the nations. But most of the prophets included in their preaching notes of hope and salvation, which not only made an impact on the people who listened to them the first time, but became part of the holy canon of Hebrew Scriptures that nourished hope in the Jewish population in later centuries, when they themselves lived either in exile or found themselves in hopeless situations. In the Hebrew Scriptures, there's 4 major prophets. That's Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and Daniel. And then there are 12 minor prophets. And they're only named major or minor prophets just because of how long the books that were named after them are there. The major prophets lived during very turbulent times around 739 to 530 before the Common Era. So there's this, 200-year period when the 4 major prophets were really on the scene, one after another, to talk about what was going on and to speak plainly, but also to bring comfort to the people because they were going through really tough times. The prophet Isaiah began preaching during a period of prosperity in Israel, but he knew that the clouds of war were on the horizon, and he was concerned that the Jewish kings were bringing idolatrous practices into the Hebrew faith and into the nation, and so he was concerned about that. For Isaiah, this was going to spell disaster, which came in the form of an Assyrian army conquering Israel in 722. So he was first on the scene, a decade more, 15 years before that time, kind of reading the signs of the time and letting the leaders know that they're kind of courting with disaster. And sure enough, it came. The Assyrian army came through, wiped out Israel. And this was followed by 100 years of corrupt vassal kings and foreign occupying forces who kept the Israelite people, who are now divided into 2 nations, Judah and Israel, subjugated. And it was hard to find anything to be hopeful about. Now, none of us have lived through that period of time in our lives, because we live in Canada, of having to, be refugees. Of course, we know refugees. We know people who came to Canada because of wars in other places. And I can't imagine what that would be like, having to leave everything that you knew. Sometimes they had to leave, of course, relatives behind in order to escape brutality, torture, and oftentimes death. We know what happened in the Second World War. We know what happened with all the Syrian refugees coming in, a decade earlier from now. In terms of how they had to escape the brutality of that regime. So this is what the people of Israel in the other province, Judah, were going through for 100 years. And so it was hard to find anything hopeful about. But things got worse in 605 before the Common Era, when Jeremiah was a prophet. There was a major confrontation between Egypt to the south of Israel and the newly rising Babylonian Empire under King Nebuchadnezzar. Most of us have heard of King Neb. And he came in and he swept aside the Assyrians from power, and now he was marching with his massive troops into Syria, and he was going to engage Egypt. Egypt was also a major power during that time. And so the Egyptians were coming through Israel. The Babylonians were gathering together on what would be called, the southern part of Syria today. And there was going to be this huge battle. And the Israelite vassal kings had to choose whose side is going to win. And the Israelite kings chose the Egyptians. The Egyptians lost. And that meant that the Babylonians now came in and took over all of the Israelite people. And that nation, the Babylonian nation, then extended all the way from Egypt in the south, Israel, it incorporated Syria, Greece, Turkey, Iraq, and Iran. So it was a huge empire. After the victory, Nebuchadnezzar visited Jerusalem and took back Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Remember those guys from your Sunday school days walking through the fiery furnace? That's where the story comes from in Daniel. And then there's the famous, Daniel in the lion's den. You remember that story? That also, of course, comes from the book of Daniel. And this is King Nebuchadnezzar again. The following year, after 605, Nebuchadnezzar returned to Israel and the southern kingdom of Judah, and he takes away 10,000 of the people who were the leaders in the nation. This is all of the political leadership, all of the government structure, all those people in the government offices, they were taken away. The religious leaders were taken away. Anyone who was wealthy was taken away as a way to kind of make sure that Israel would never rise up against King Nebuchadnezzar. He took them all back, these 10,000 people, back to Babylon. That's what, if you hear about the Babylonian exile, the exile of the Jewish people, that's what they were referring to. In this period of time, when all of the people who kind of kept the people of Israel together, religiously, militarily, and with the government, they were taken away. Now, talk about hopelessness. The most holy city and temple of the people in Jerusalem were really, really terribly defeated at that time. And then 11 years later, after some rebellions from the Jewish vassal states, King Neb came back down and he wiped out Jerusalem, destroyed the temple. So again, when you hear about the destruction of the first temple, that was Solomon's temple, it happened in 586. Now talk about hopelessness. The holy city, the temple, is decimated. It lay in ruins. Now you might wonder, why do we care about Israel's ancient history? Well, I think for one thing, the history is recorded to remind future generations that all of us have faced hopeless situations before. And the words of the prophets can speak to us when we face our own times of hopelessness. Maybe our hopelessness isn't quite like what it was for the Jewish people, but each one of us has gone through some pretty tough times, I'm sure of it. When you get a health scare, or the doctor says, I'm sorry that this is not treatable. Sometimes people go into a depression. Sometimes when someone you love dearly dies, maybe suddenly or maybe over an extended period of time, and you feel the loss so significantly, it feels like life is hopeless. I know so many people who lost moms early on. They never had that kind of the bond that most of us have with a mother figure in our lives. And sometimes when life is tough for them, they feel a little bit hopeless. So you know what hopelessness might feel like, and the scriptures are there as part of the way that God speaks to us in our seasons of sadness, despair, and hopelessness. so that we might find encouragement and recognize that other people have gone through these things, worse things than us, but God is always there. Now, of course, the prophets pointed out the failings of the corrupt kings and religious leaders, but they also planted seeds of hope and gave the people images of God's ways, that God was working behind the scenes. If they didn't see it immediately, the prophets were there to remind them that God was working behind the scenes and those hopeless days would end. Isaiah introduced some images of hope that you heard Burns speak from Isaiah 40. The desert shall bloom like a crocus. A surviving remnant will bear fruit. This is Isaiah speaking about the remnant who had gone to Babylon. And he's saying, you know what, the remnant's going to survive. And one day they'll be brought back to Jerusalem. And there'll be good times again. He says, those who wait for the Lord will rise up on wings like eagles. He says, comfort my people. That's what God says to you. Every valley will be raised up and the glory of the Lord will be revealed. People who are going through hopeless situations need to hear voices of hope. They need to see in us oftentimes, or in people around them, people who give them hope, give them strength, and give them courage to face the toughest of days. You know, the Hebrew word hope actually comes from the image of someone throwing you a rope. It's not throwing you a tug of rope, you know, where you're competing with some other team or another person. It's like throwing you a rope when you're down in a hole and you have no way to get up. And the rope is thrown down there and there's some people up above helping you to get out of that hole. That's what this image of hope comes from for the Hebrew people. So friends, today, let's grasp the rope of hope that God sends to us in these ancient stories of our faith. Because I know that for some of you, you're at the end of your rope. For some of you, you might be feeling emotionally exhausted after a recent death of a loved one, or caring for someone who is elderly or who has dementia or is going through their own health struggles. And you know what it's like to be a caregiver. Sometimes it feels like you don't have strength just to get through the next day. Some of you, of course, struggle with things from the past. Maybe some of the moms had miscarriages. And you know that a mom always cares for a child, whether it's born or dies. Maybe you got caught in a cycle of depression or loneliness and it feels like it's hopeless. The promise of the prophets and the Gospels is that God can make a way through the darkness. God can bring back people to their homeland. God can raise the dead. God can see you through the worst of times. And the way God frequently throws us a rope and gives us hope is through the community of faith. Today, if you feel like you're at the end of the rope, then let us throw you a rope to help you get through to better days, because we're in this together. Here at Grace, we're rooting for you. We're praying for you, interceding for you, and believing that you'll get through your sadness or the loss that you're feeling now or the pain that you're going through, because you're not alone. You're walking with the people of God. And if you don't have much faith, then borrow it from some of us who have greater faith. It's okay. And for those of you who have hope to spare, because I know some of you are people who have a positive kind of faith and who have gone through rough times and come out the other side, and you've got hope. So if you have hope to spare, let's look for opportunities to become a beacon of hope for someone else in the week ahead. Remember whose child you are. You're a son or daughter of the Most High God. He's not shaken by the events of this day. He's aware of your problems. He's on your side. God is alive, present, and active in the places where we're living and the people who we are living with. And today, if you still need a boost to your faith, I want to tell you a story of hope from the streets of Philadelphia. I purchased a book called from John Kasich, who was the governor of Ohio, and it's called Heaven Help Us. And it's a book of stories of people in communities of faith, whether it's the Muslim community or the Jewish community or the Christian community, communities of faith that have tried to make a difference, because we know one person can be a significant person to us, like a mom or a grandma or a foster mom. But we know that communities of faith, when people get together to tackle a problem or an issue, they can make a huge difference in a community. Here's one from the early 80s. Her name, the person that we're going to focus on, her name is Sister Mary Scullion. When she was just a novice back in the 80s in Philadelphia, She saw the plight of unsheltered people in different neighborhoods of the city. And her compassion moved her to establish a safe haven for women living on the streets. You would probably understand that women living on the streets are the most vulnerable of any group. And if you take, First Nations people, women living on the streets, that's even more vulnerable. She began by taking a census of the problem, and then she took that census and what she discovered about the women living on the streets of Philadelphia in the early 80s to the city's Office of Mental Health and lobbied for funds and programming to address the issue of homelessness for women. And thus begun the Women of Hope shelter. Sister Mary lived in the shelter alongside the women she was helping. She didn't feel like she was above them. She didn't feel like she needed, a safe refuge. She lived with them. She cooked with them. She counseled them. She struggled with them. She didn't do things alone, though. She found like-minded people to help with her cause. And soon there was a whole group of people who really believed that God had called them to make a difference where they were on the streets of Philadelphia. Now, of course, it took a lot of work and prayer and going up against skeptical city managers, administrators, and politicians. But they persisted, and their work expanded, and they got the attentions of some very wealthy business people who made donations because they believed in the cause and they trusted Sister Mary. Her religious order, the Sisters of Mercy, were also out there supporting this essential work. And she was joined by volunteers from many churches, lawyers, students, and people from different religious traditions, all working for the same cause, to make life better for those women who found themselves on the streets of Philadelphia. She retired last year, but I want to read just a small portion from this book. And her larger organization is called Project Home. Scott Jenkins and I, John, have taken to calling her Sister Mary the $100 million nun, because that's how much money she's raised over the years. $100 million. I'm sure she never imagined when she was a novice and she saw the problem on the streets that the women who were there were going through, that over the course of 30 or 40 years, she could raise $100 million and make such a difference in the lives of thousands and thousands of women. Project Home initiatives have touched the lives of thousands of people, and she's confident that even in retirement, she'll find a way to help the organization meet its ever-changing goals. So, that's a pretty amazing story. Now, here's the truth. Of course, there are big problems around us. We know that in the world. Many of you are facing some of your own personal challenges, but look for hope in the stories of the Bible. Discover how God got the people of Israel through some very hopeless times. Look around today at the people on your street who are good neighbors. People in the community who are doing great things. 100, women. What's that organization called? 100 plus women, and there's 100 men or good men or something like this, right? And there's other organizations in the community, the Rotarians and so on and so forth. They're all doing good works, because when we gather together with hearts of compassion, see a problem, we are stronger together to make a difference. And that's what's going on, multiplied thousands of times across our nation. Every day, there are good people who have good intentions, who are making a difference and bringing hope to people who are finding life really tough. And so I find that all around me. When I think of the situation in the world, I try to balance it off with, I know good people who are making a real difference. People like the three guys, the three amigos, who decided that Sharon couldn't get into the church because the ramp wasn't accommodating a wheelchair. And they said, well, we can do something about that. And with their knowledge together and hard work, they changed it. So here, Sharon is here with us today in person. That's a wonderful thing, right? You see, all of us can bring hope to people in small ways and large ways. And communities of faith down through the ages have done that for thousands and thousands of years, because we believe that God is a God of hope. That God works through individuals, God works through communities of faith to to challenge the problems and to face them and to bring something good to the table so that life is better for other people. Jesus did it all the time. We're his followers, so let's follow in those footsteps. Let's bring hope to people around us. Be a bearer of hope. And if you need hope or you need a rope to hold on to climb up, we're here for you. We're here for you. Amen.